Welcome to the Chain Effect Podcast, where a physical therapist and a dietitian married with 2 kids juggle the struggle of running a business, raising a family, and prioritizing our own health, all while trying to have as much fun as possible.
We are your hosts, Taylor Pope, Doctor of Physical Therapy, and
Caroline Pope, registered dietitian.
Together we own and operate a health facility bringing together physical therapists, dietitians, personal trainers, and active recovery services to create what we call the Chain Effect. So I was in yoga yesterday, and hip hop yoga, and I noticed that I was listening to the track. I was in the moment. I was doing the flows, and I was very present with my breathing, getting all the way through it. And I started to realize that it was the same like hip hop track, the same mix of songs that they've been doing for the last like 4 or 5 times. And I realized that because I was like hearing this specific song, I knew that the class was almost over. And immediately I was like thinking about what was going to happen later on in the day and like what I needed to do after class. And it got me thinking about how pattern is sort of the enemy of being present, right? Like if we think about our routines in the morning, what do our routines? And this isn't a bad thing. I think this is a super important thing. But our routines allow us to sort of plan and get into our forward thinking about what we need to do that day.
Mm-hmm. Well, they take the thinking out of it. That's what routines and that's for. So you just kind of go through the rhythm.
Yeah.
Think's faster, I guess.
And because, we're not thinking, we're sort of in that place that all of a sudden now we're able to, create a plan for the rest of the day, kind of get our boxes aligned of what we want to do. But how do we be more present? And it got me thinking that we really need novelty in our life and those moments of quiet where the pattern of life is sort of turned off for us to get into that present mindset. And it got me thinking about a software that we use called New Calm. And this is one of our active recovery services that we do at Chain Effect. But New Calm is sort of a deep meditation. Kind of think about like the float tanks where everyone's like floating in water, but there's no water. You're in a zero gravity chair. You got, an eye mask on, and you're listening to the what sounds like just like music at first, and then it transitions to kind of some nature sounds.
It sounds like what you would hear when you're getting a massage or something, but it's so much deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
You know more about it. Describe it.
It's a deep meditation system. And basically the goal is for it to decrease your brainwave frequency over the course of the session. So, if you know anything about brainwave frequency, that basically determines your state of alertness. So we have gamma waves, which is motor functions and sort of higher mental stuff, which it's kind of actually hard to get to, but sometimes when you're having those gamma waves, that's like a stroke of insight. And then below that is your normal waking state, which is beta waves. And these are from 12 hertz to 30 hertz. And that's concentration, focus, and your physical senses and everything's sort of integrated. But basically you are alert and you're interacting with everything that's going on and you're focused. And then below that is your alpha waves, which is 7.5 hertz to 12 hertz. And that is your relaxed, light meditative state, your creative state, super learning and conscious. But you're sort of in that relaxed, non-stressed state. So more tapping into, that parasympathetic nervous system. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But below that is theta waves. And theta waves are light sleep, deep meditation, and where your brain might just be sort of rambling on its own little journey, but that's where a lot of creative insight comes in. And you can think about how when you wake up in the morning, if you're sort of going in and out of sleep, that's theta, where you're not really asleep all the way, but you can sort of like go back in and like be involved in your dreams
like
a little bit.
Someone's alarm clock keeps going off.
Yeah,
and the
you
other
keep
person
you
is
keep
trying to sleep. They're half asleep.
Do you know about this? Do you know about this personally?
It's familiar.
Is this happening in
Not this
in your
morning.
bedroom?
You had to wake up super early this morning. I slept through that, but a lot of times I hear it.
Well, my watch will now ding me, like it'll start vibrating like 3 or 4 seconds before my alarm goes off.
Oh, that's helpful.
So if I can get to the little watch crown, push it, then I can hit snooze from my watch crown, and then the alarm never goes off. So I've developed that. It's been training me. Anyway, underneath that is delta waves. Now that's 0 to 4 hertz. And that is your deep, dreamless, non-REM sleep or unconsciousness. And so depending on basically like how many waves per second are going on in our brain is determining what state of alertness we're in. And what New Calm does is it takes us from that alpha or that beta, that 12 to 30 hertz where we all live and we're sort of stressed out in a constant state of fight or flight, otherwise known as sympathetic nervous system dominance. And it transitions us down to transitions down those alpha theta waves. And the way it does that is by non-repeating oscillations and vibrations underneath the music. And so as you're listening to it, and I had to, they got a patent on this, and I listened to this phone call where they were really teaching us about how it works. But the secret sauce behind this New Calm is that it never repeats. So your brain is constantly looking for the pattern in the music that doesn't exist. And the act of that keeps you more present in the moment, which allows your body to tap into parasympathetic nervous system dominance. Boom.
Wow. Because when you listen to these tracks, you don't really think about that. I mean, I thought it was a repeating pattern. But so New Calm, you've known about for, how long have we had it? We've had it 6, 7 years?
Yeah, we've had it since 2017, but it's been around since 2012.
Yeah, and people love it. I mean, our clients that do it, they really love it.
People use it for insomnia. We've had some now moms basically who are dealing with some fertility issues because they were constantly overstressed and so worried about that process and that fight or flight, get pregnant from using New Calm. I'm not going to claim that will happen to everybody, but
it may not be the whole cause, but it decreases
there's obviously some other things
levels
going on there too. Yeah.
So that is really cool. Yeah. So we have New Calm. People can come in and listen to it and everything. But so how could we do that without New Calm? How can we do that in our daily lives where it's non-repeating patterns occasionally? We can always do that. We have to be in a routine sometimes.
Right. And first, I think, it's worth just touching upon those different systems, right? So you have those two autonomic nervous system pathways, sympathetic.
You know more about this from school. You remember all this.
Yeah. So you have the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and recovery. But it's also known as rest and digest. It's also known as breed and feed, but that's like a whole nother thing. But the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system were always thought to, work. One was working or the other one was working. And now we've sort of gained a little bit of realization that we can kind of transition back and forth between the two with a little bit more flow. But in general, they tend to be sort of a contrast to each other. And when we're in sympathetic nervous system dominance, which is the fight or flight, we're releasing more stress hormones. We're at a more alert state. Our heart rate is more consistent. So it's beating more rapidly with more consistency. Our respiratory rate is higher. Our pupils are dilated so that we can see farther more clearly, and blood flow is being shunted away from our organs to our limbs, just in case we needed to battle a predator or run away from a predator. So during that state, there's not a lot of recovery happening. There's not a lot of rebuilding of the body's systems that's going on during that sympathetic nervous system dominance. And again, this is automatic. This is not like you can voluntarily just say, okay, I'm going to turn on my sympathetic. I'm going to turn off my parasympathetic. In parasympathetic nervous system dominance, that's that rest and recovery. So all of the opposite things are happening. Our heart rate is more in a meandering state. Our respiratory rate goes down. Our our pupils do the opposite, or I guess constrict in that way. And then we are shunting blood back to our digestive system so that we can digest our food, and all of those cellular processes are happening. So those are the two states, and we need both of them, but we don't need to be in both of them all the time, right? Like we don't need to only be in sympathetic nervous system dominance, fight or flight, because that really wears down our system over time.
Right. So some things like you, partly for yoga, it's nice for you to go to have decreased stress and get into that parasympathetic system. But I guess it's more helpful for you if you don't know what tracks are coming, don't know what moves are coming. Because if a teacher's guiding you, you don't know what's coming. So it's getting you out of that pattern. You don't know the flow, unless I guess you go there all the time and you have it memorized, depending on the teacher. But so that may be helpful sometimes. What are some other ways we can get into that parasympathetic system?
Yeah. I mean, just putting yourself in places where you're not really in charge of what's going to happen next. So being out in nature, right? And listening to just the sounds that are going on and trying to be more present.
Because you could try meditation, but I know my mind is, my mind will be wandering all over the place when I try to meditate or deep breathe.
And meditation too, a lot of people call it the meditation muscle. So for a lot of people, it's not in their normal way of being to be in that more relaxed state, and everything is getting in the way of that right now with technology. Emails, text messages, alerts, likes, social media, all of that is tapping into that sympathetic nervous system dominance and creating us more on edge, making us more on edge, making us more thinking about what's going to happen next. So putting those devices away. Going outside.
Turning off notifications.
Yeah, turning off notifications. But hey, maybe just leave your phone inside, right? Just leave it inside and go sit in the yard and just listen. Close your eyes, listen, and see where your brain takes you. Go on a walk. Go on a walk without your phone and see all the things that are going on. I mean, you and I, that's one of my pet peeves, right? When I'm sitting on the porch and I see someone walk by and they never look up from their phone, and I got my hand in the air.
They're looking down at their phone while they're walking on the sidewalk about to run into the street.
I got my hand half cocked, just ready for a wave. Like if they might look up and look across the street, like I'm like half waving at them like the whole time they're walking by. I get so annoyed by that.
But yeah, getting some fresh air, going on a walk, because you never know. It's novel because you don't know what you're going to see, smell, hear, what people you're going to see, especially if you're not on your phone the whole time.
One more thing, just being with my kids, I feel like their minds are they just sort of live in the present without any like concept of time. And so if I can just be with them and let them dictate, what we're doing and what I'm thinking about, then they tend to be a lot more present in the moment, and just the random things that they say are truly novel. Yeah.
So, and because they're not aware of the routines yet, really, and that we're trying to reinforce, but they're not really aware of that or the to-do list, things I check off in my mind all day. They just get really into an activity or drawing or building or something creative. And same thing like in the morning, I guess, if you have a morning routine, one way to shift that a little bit, add something novel, is like waking up a little early and sitting with your kid, drinking coffee, talking to them, reading them a book, something different rather than just going through the motions.
Yeah. And a lot of times in the morning, right, is our most creative period of the day. And so they might be more willing to have those conversations than after school, when they get in the car and you're like, how was your day? And they're like, good.
Definitely.
Like, can you tell me anything about your day? Good.
I mean, bad. Before we had our second, I would wake up and have coffee and read to Bennett, and we would snuggle, and that was the best in the morning. But then with two kids, it gets a little harder because they're fighting over you. And but that's a great time. And really just, going into meal times, like how can we sit and be more present? And with that, I guess adding novelty into meal times or changing up meal times so that it's not just routine, and we can digest our food better because we're shifting into the parasympathetic nervous system.
And you talk about that a lot with your patients, right? About how stress and the connection with stress and eating and that whole how do you explain that to them?
Well, you just don't realize you're eating if you're not present in the moment. And then our hunger hormone, we don't really realize we're full. So it does take time. It takes you to be present, that mindful eating. Like, okay, it takes 20 to 30 minutes for my stomach to feel, for my brain to know that my stomach is getting full. So how can we extend that time? How can we make those meals and snacks longer when we're in such a rushed culture? And part of that is just being more mindful, like actually sitting down. That's one way for people to enjoy their food and then realize they ate and not snack all day.
And so it almost seems like you need to schedule your lunch, right? Don't just take your lunch, eat it real fast at your desk while you're scanning over emails.
Yes.
Or eating it and just like blazing through it.
Yes. Like distracted eating, eating in front of the TV, eating dinner in front of the TV, eating in front of your work. I mean, I have some patients will schedule out, we'll talk about a goal to remove that distracted eating is scheduling out, blocking their schedule so people don't block meetings over their lunch. That's what happens for a lot of people I see. So sometimes it's a little out of their control, but if they can block themselves a lunch every day where they don't have meetings, they could step outside, eat outside, have an actual break. And, what's even better is talking with coworkers on your lunch break or talking with family members on your lunch break because that creates that novelty.
Right. So, saving some of those conversations that you want to have with your coworkers and then sitting down and having them in a way where you're both like relaxed and present.
Instead of getting them in the hallway and,
Yeah. And
quickly talking about stuff, like save that, have a nice lunch, take the time. And when we're in Europe, we see these coworkers having 2-hour lunches, relaxed. They're having some wine. They're having some big lunch. And, lunch is their biggest meal of the day typically, which I agree with. I think that's wonderful. And we should be more like that, but we don't. We're so rushed here.
I mean, in France, they literally have a law. They must have an hour and a half lunch. It's a law. Companies must give their employees an hour and a half lunch. It's called the French lunch.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing. We always wonder how Europe is, healthier in some ways, maybe lower obesity rates, lower overweight rates, and although they eat a lot more breads.
Yeah, and how much of that could be attributed to stress, right? Mm-hmm. And if I hear you saying, so people who are sitting down for their meal, even if they're by themselves, should not be just doom scrolling, online, right? Like they should not be scrolling through Instagram while they're eating their meals. You should be, taking a mental break, even if you don't have to be thinking about every single bite, but maybe you're just letting your brain wander for a couple minutes.
Maybe you're listening to music you like. If you're by yourself, maybe you're just noticing you're cooking something exciting, or you use different spices, or maybe you want to look up different recipes and get excited about the food you're eating so that you can really sit there and enjoy it. But, definitely not scrolling, watching TV, watching shows, working. If you can just be present, that's one way to really, really reduce that stress and let your body not only digest food better, you're not running around rushed, but also you're not standing while you're eating, scarfing it down. So you're digesting better, but you're also feeling those fullness cues.
Yeah,
your brain needs to feel that.
You were explaining that whole sort of cascade to me the other day about how stress affects sleep, affects the different craving. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about it, more stress usually leads to sleep disruption as well. So this isn't just stress with eating, but stress in general usually leads to sleep disruption. Sleep disruption is really linked to mood, hunger regulation. So that means hunger hormones, that regulation, impulse control. There are many studies that show impulse control goes down when we have more sleep disruption, don't get as good a sleep.
And you're not talking about just how that willpower that we start off in the beginning of the day just gets worn down over the course of the day. From what I hear you saying, like our hormones are actually forcing us to have different cravings.
Yeah, well, we get hungry more easily. So ghrelin is our hunger hormone, leptin is our fullness hormone, and those are dysregulated when we get less sleep. And so we could feel hungrier, truly. But the impulse control could be more of the willpower going down, but our brain seeks carbs, sugar more when we have sleep disruption. And that has been proven as well. So those who don't sleep, don't get a good week of sleep, you might notice you're having more carb cravings the next day or throughout that whole week. You're craving sugar. Your brain wants that because it's like a drug. Sugar is like a drug to us. And it has the same effect, right away that like cocaine has. And so sugar is very addictive and we crave that more when we're not sleeping as well. And sleep disruption also is linked to thermoregulation and metabolic changes. So when we have that sympathetic state, that sympathetic activation plus sleep disruption plus stress, those are all three factors that can lead to immunometabolic dysfunction.
Whoa.
Have you heard of that?
Not until today.
You can kind of think about what that is, but that is the metabolic state of immune cells. It's this whole, section of science and people are studying this, and it's how immune cells respond to environmental cues by reprogramming their metabolism, which in turn impacts their function. So we know how that could lead to, we know what that would lead to.
Well, we've been talking a lot about how, blood glucose and, sugar in your bloodstream affects the metabolic function of cells, at the cellular level, right? So like you spike your blood glucose and then you have an insulin response, and then that can alter the sort of lifespan of your cells.
Yeah, and how your cells want to uptake glucose or not. Are they more sensitive to glucose? Are they more resistant to glucose uptake?
But you're saying our immune cells also have the same thing.
Right. So what can happen is they're responding to those environmental cues like the stress, lower sleep, the sympathetic activation turning on. Then what this does is it decreases fat utilization. So the cells are decreasing using that fat. So they're storing fat. They're not burning it. They're not using it in ways we typically should. They're storing it. It also increases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Good cortisol is very important for a lot of things in our life, but if it is turned on all the time, that can lead to a lot of health issues down the road.
Right.
Insulin resistance. So higher cortisol can increase insulin resistance, which we know is a risk factor for dementia, cancer, obesity, diabetes, of course. So this is all linked, and it's really, really interesting, but very important to understand. And
just to back you up, if you're burning more, if your cells are not burning fat as appropriately, that means they're burning more carbs, right? And then would you then crave more carbs because of that? Like if your cells are burning, if you're kind of your metabolism, because you've seen all these, like, I forget the different apps that people are coming out with these days, which shows if you're burning more fat or burning more carb at any given point. I wonder if that makes you crave more carbs.
Yeah. I mean, maybe your body needs more glycogen stores. Maybe it's burning down the glycogen stores more than you should, making you crave more carbs, more sugar, because your body needs that. And your brain needs carbs for energy as well. But all of those, so sleep disturbance from stress, going back to the sleep part, because that's really important.
Right.
And those are linked so well. Sleep disturbance often also drives the increased carb, quick sugar intake due to lower impulse control and fatigue, but also it increases alcohol consumption because we have this perceived belief that, I need to relax. So alcohol, carbs are going to make me feel better due to the stress, fatigue. It's going to help me sleep. It's going to help me go to sleep. And for some people, they say, when I have a glass of wine, it helps me sleep. But we know the sleep quality is impaired. We know they're not getting as good of sleep. And not good to sleep then further contributes to metabolic dysfunction.
Right.
So it's a vicious cycle. So stress, I've heard a lot of health professionals in webinars and continuing ed, and whether it's functional medicine doctors, whether it's dietitians, are all saying, we'd like to say food is the most important thing to change, but stress is right there too. And we're finding in our culture, stress might be the number one thing to tackle.
And you can't just wish away stress. You can't just say, oh, well, next week I'm going to be less stressed because I won't have these things on my plate.
Right.
But if you're the type of person that finds that week in and week out, it's just another crisis every single week, you might need to be a little bit more proactive about finding those opportunities to de-stress and just slow things down. And everybody on the planet is telling everybody else on the planet, you need to get off your devices. But people, we have to, I mean, the science is telling us every single day that we need to spend less time on our devices, less time,
especially at night, so we can sleep better,
right? Less time consuming information and just letting our brains organize that information by just having nothing to do.
Be bored a little bit.
Be bored. Michael Easter. Comfort crisis, right?
Yeah, we need to be bored. Kids need to be bored. You know, I've learned that from so many. That's been reinforced from all these child psychologists blogs and stuff I follow. It's like they need to be bored. They need to figure out what to do themselves, but have that. We don't need to always give them an activity to do.
Yeah,
and rush them around to activities.
And sometimes I'm driving Bennett across town, or we're driving to the beach, and I look back, and he's just like staring out the window, like. You know, because we don't do devices in the car. We make our kids listen to us
just
and listen
there.
to music or podcasts.
So he's 5.5, and we've never introduced it, so he doesn't know the difference. But he doesn't have an iPad or a tablet or anything he plays with, and he's just staring at the car. If he doesn't fall asleep, he's just staring and just taking it in.
Yeah. And I feel bad sometimes, but that's what he needs. He just needs to sit there and like be with his thoughts.
What did we do when we were little kids?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we didn't have devices. We survived.
Eventually I got a Walkman, and then I like burned the Pearl Jam cassette tapes on a trip. But yeah. So.
But I think going back to that, when we, you know, if we have kids, if we have families, we have to teach them how to sit at a table as well, and not be bored, but engage in conversation, not sit in front of the TV to eat, so that we can digest our food, so we can feel those fullness cues. We should not be having screens at the table for the most part, right? There's always different occasions that come up, but having that family meal where you're not rushing around, where, you know, maybe that's breakfast for you, maybe that's dinner, but a lot of dietitians talk about if you can have one family meal per day together where you are sitting there enjoying each other's company, it brings that positivity around meals and not a negative relationship with food, which some people have depending on how they grew up, or, you know, what was reinforced at mealtime and what that meal structure was like, or there was no meal structure. So having that family time, having the kids sit there, you know, they may not sit too long, but talking and having that time, being present with them while you're eating and enjoying food.
And that is really what we're talking about by interrupting the routines. So interrupting the routines, getting out of your patterns of just going through the motions of the day, and taking a break gives your body and your mind, because you're changing those brainwave frequencies. You're down regulating your brainwave frequency to those alpha waves. You're getting out of those beta waves into those alpha waves. And that is the only thing that is going to transition your body into this parasympathetic rest and recovery state. So you can't wish yourself into better digestion. You can't just, you know, wave a magic wand and all of a sudden like be relaxed. You have to have your brain down regulate. You got to let yourself be bored. You got to get off the devices and put the email away and put all that stuff away. And just sit there and be present, and it will happen. And you'll interrupt that cycle, and you'll interrupt that whole vicious loop of sleep that's leading to basically distant metabolic dysfunction down the line, right?
Yeah.
Just that cycle over and over again until the system wears out.
Yeah, and that the immune system, the metabolic system with the immune cells, that essentially decreases our health span. And so we know how important our immune system is. We don't always think about that. But another way of doing that, I just thought when you said interrupt the cycle or take a break, if you are working all day and you want a snack, or you do have a strong sweet craving or some sort of craving for a snack, or you're hungry, make yourself sit down in the kitchen and eat that instead of swiping by, grabbing it, going back to your work, like enjoying it. And I tell my patients to do that too. If you're going to have chocolate, like just really enjoy it. Otherwise we're still in that high stress, state, but we're also not enjoying it and we forget we have it. And then we might go back and have more like a,
like
if you have
eating
a sleeve,
at the fridge, right?
Yeah. Standing in front of the fridge. If you're the type that stands in front of the fridge,
just grab the peanut butter and just
get a spoon and like dig in. Oh, a couple bites here, a couple bites here. Then you go to the cabinet, a couple handfuls of that. You have no idea that you even ate. Your system and your brain doesn't recognize that you just ate. And then you go back to your work and then you're like, I'm hungry again.
Yeah. Portion it out, have a seat and just sit there. Yeah. So those are some great tips. And we want to hear from you. If you have any tips on or things that you do to help break that cycle and get you into a more present way of being, shoot us an email, taylor@chaineffect.us or caroline@chaineffect.us, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. Catch you on the flip side.